So in the next part of this video, we're going to look at creating some lights and creating a camera to kind of make our scene a little bit dynamic. Just reminded that, of course, you can always still animate things. So if I turn my my curtain back on, I'm just going to zoom in. By the way, if you want to go back to one view, just click in the center, go back to one view. And I'm just going to animate the curtain. So just like with anything else, you can see that the curtain, the ground floor plane is still sort of interacting too much with the curtain, so I might pull that down a little bit. And if you're struggling with this, just go back to four views. It's that sort of toggle between the two till it's right. Might hit R for rotation on this and just rotate it a little bit more so it's a little bit flatter. That's a preference thing. It's your stage, it's your thing. So, and then I'm just going to take that down because I can see it's too far up. So, I want to animate the curtain now. Gotta go back to one view. And you notice how like I've done a nice job of like labeling everything nicely so I can find things. Do the same. If your layers aren't labeled, just remember you guys click on the layer name and hit enter and then change the name. Yeah? So, with the curtain, I am going to animate that. So I'm going to hit P for position, set my first keyframe just like I would with anything else. And you notice once again, your position has a third value. Yeah? You got your X, your Y, and the Z. So I'm going to set it there, and then further on, I'm just going to move it up. Now, cat, when you move it up, it sticks out the top. We're going to create a mask. You guys all remember how to make masks, right? Or hopefully you do. So I'm going to click on the layer. It's going to make sure it's selected. I'm going to create a mask. Your mask is your rectangular selection tool. When the layer is selected, you'll see it's a lighter shaded color. Select the rectangle tool and drag out a mask. So I can say, all right, I want my mask, V to go back to my pointer tool. I want my mask just to be on this area. I just want it to be inside the theater. So now if I watch my animation, see how it sticks up above? I could animate the mask path. So if I go to mask path, set some keyframes there, make sure it's right. Boom, okay. There's my first keyframe on my mask path. Looks good, looks good, looks good. Start sticking out the top. The instant it starts doing that, click away and then click back on. Let me just select one mask path point. And then very roughly go along. You can do it the other way around too. And if it jumps out of screen, just zoom out and just toggle those back. You notice it jumped quite further along in time. That's fine. Basically, you can make just a couple of coarse, crude keyframes, and then any point where it sticks up too much, like where it starts to pop above or do something you don't want it to do, you can just adjust, because like with keyframes, everything the instant you have them set there, it should be fine. So now the curtain goes up, boom, and it doesn't stick out the top. Well, it kind of does at the very end. You saw that very quickly. There's a bit there, so I'm just gonna adjust. And I know this is the height of exciting animation. There we go. So, curtain goes up, excellent. But I'd like the house lights to turn on. Right now you notice that everything's sort of like flat lit. Inside of After Effects, you can adjust how things are lit. So what we can do is we can adjust the lighting for our scene. So to do that, if I don't want flat lighting, if I want more dynamic lighting, I'm going to go back into four views. And I am going to create some lights. Layer, new, light is where we're going to create lights. So, there are different types of lights. There's spotlights. Spotlights will just give you sort of a hot spot, a point, and an ambient light, and a parallel. So we'll go through all different ones. We'll start off with a spotlight. You can see I've got the color of the light, the cone angle, the cone feather, fall off. We're going to do smooth. That's basically, the fall off is, if you're looking at a light, you know how light gradually gets fades away because it's not strong enough. That's something you can adjust as well. Or you can have it be the same. You can have it cast shadows or not cast shadows. And part of the reason why you'd want to create lights in After Effects is maybe you want to play with shadows as part of that element. And the instant I create this, you'll notice how this will affect all the 3D layers. And lights only work on layers that are three-dimensional. They do not work if you haven't activated or toggled three-dimensionality on that layer. You see, the instant I've done that, my whole lighting scheme has changed. And I've got this light now. You can see as I move it around, that's my spotlight. So I could animate that all on itself. If I change the light, if I go into my light and go into light options, if I change that from a spot to a parallel light, imagine that sort of casting parallel rays, kind of like the sun. And as I move it closer or further away, you notice that it makes it brighter or darker. That's a fall off. You see that with the light, you've got two properties. You've got basically the point to which the light hits. This is sort of like the target point for the light. And you got the physical light itself. So you can animate these two options. So if you go to the sort of light transforms, you've got the point of interest, that's that point there, and then you've got the position of the light itself that you can animate. You can adjust the intensity of the light. So if you wanted the light to like fade on, you could increase the intensity just like that. You can increase the fall off, sort of the radius, how big the light is. The fall off distance, if you make it shorter, it's less intense, but if I make it much larger, you'll see it sort of does the exact same sort of flat lighting that we've done before. So I'm just going to quickly animate the intensity of the light. I want to say at this point in time or a little bit earlier, and then I'm going to have the light sort of fade on. Yeah, so I'm going to turn down its intensity. So you can barely sort of see the stage. And then I'm going to have it turn on basically as the curtain rises. I could have that slower again, just like with anything in the animation. The distance between the two keyframes determines the speed at which it animates. So right, I've got that. That's my first light. You can see on the sort of the right hand view the sort of position and the angle of that light. And I can also adjust that and play around with that as well. Basically, it's saying from this point light, this is going to be where the light hits, and this is going to be the angle from which it's going to hit. And I can adjust that angle by adjusting that sort of point of interest. So let's add, you can see that the light's barely hitting the ground plane, so the ground plane is very, very dark. If I angle that down a little bit more, you see I'm looking at the top view to help guide me with that. You'll see that it'll help with lighting that ground plane as well, depending on the angle of the light. These lights are supposed to mimic actual lighting, so there is that sort of faked lighting effect. If you play around with it, you can do quite a bit with lighting, but it's not something you want for every scene. So if you want sort of everything flat lit, you might ignore this part with lighting entirely. I'm going to go Layer, New Light. I'm going to add another light. Spotlight 2, that's fine. This time I think I'm going to just change its color to be some sort of, I don't know, dramatic blue. And you can see there's my second light. It's quite big. I'm going to go into its properties. I'm going to go to light options, and I'm going to adjust the cone angle so it's much smaller. And I'm going to adjust its perspective. I want to have it, I don't know, just light basically down on my stage. So I'm going to change its position so it's literally almost like right on top of everything. And I'm going to grab its cone angle and I'm just going to drag that directly down inside of my stage. You can see it's a bit of just, whoops, if you mess that up, just Command Z undo. And it is a bit sort of tricky when you are playing around with this the first time. It is kind of snappy. It doesn't do always what you want it to do. I'm going to adjust the cone angle, make it a little bit smaller, and I'm going to adjust the intensity of that light. So if I was to turn off or turn down the intensity of the other light, you'll notice that the spotlight starts to kind of be this blue presence inside of the stage. I can just increase the radius a little bit. I can adjust the cone angle. I can adjust the cone feather. That's how much it sort of gets soft around the edges of the cone. I can adjust the intensity a little bit more. You can see the inside I drag that up. That also affects how it works. And I can drag the cone itself further down. You see how that's instant, like the super intense blue. So if I turn the other light back on, if I just increase the intensity again on that light, I've got that sort of highlight as well. And you can add as many of these lights as you want. And the instant the curtain is down, you should see that the curtain is kind of in front of where that other light works. So it's not really affecting that light, but it's there in this other setting. And you can play around and do quite a few things with sort of lighting and animation with that. So just keep in mind that lighting is a very sort of simple tool. If I go back and layer new light, just to show you one more light option, if I change it from spot to sort of a point light, that's a very small light. I'm going to change its color to like, I don't know, like a super intense red. A point light is kind of like a cone of light. It's different than a spotlight. If I drag it so you can see it, it's like a little sphere of light. That's the best way to explain it. So I'm just going to drag that into my scene. And you kind of see as it is sort of this little sphere. If I go into that light, point light 2, if I go into sort of the transform properties of that, it just has a position because it doesn't have something to spot on it. It's like a little volumetric sphere of light. That's the best way to explain it. If I go into my light options for this one, I can change the intensity, the radius, it's how big it is. So if I make it really, really small, you can see it kind of works like a little tiny highlight. You can see that the highlight itself is something you can manipulate. You can change the fall off from smooth to none, and you can see it is itself just like a red space. If I change that back to smooth, you can see it's a little bit nicer on that sort of thing. So the best way to kind of get used to kind of playing with lighting in three-dimensional space with After Effects is just kind of test to see what sort of things you want to do. The reason why I've given you this sort of paper theater as well is that you can almost imagine this being like a little production. You can imagine that maybe, I don't know, that this is like a little Tinkerbell sort of character. Another really cool thing to do with a light like this is on its intensity, you could add a wiggle script. So I'm going to hit Alt key and click on that, and I'm going to type wiggle. And I'll say 3 and a value of 50. So now if I look at that light, you see how it pulses? If you haven't done wiggle scripts before and done script writing, it's a really great way of giving like a very quick effect to that light. So I'm just going to take its radius, I'm going to take its fall off and make it really, really tiny, but make it super intense. So you see, it's just kind of this little pulsating red light. You could do this to any light. You could add a wiggle to the intensity of the light. You could do its position. All of that stuff will just give it that sort of pulsating little look. The last sort of effect to look at with lights, I'm going to go light, new, light, is the other one is just an ambient light. And if I just make this green just to show you, an ambient light is basically like a god light. It's sort of the light that lights everything. This is the most sort of flat lighting. You can't really do much with the lighting other than adjust its intensity and the color. But basically, you can change from an ambient light will fill everything with the screen with that color. So if you had 3D stuff and you had some lights, but you still want like an overall sort of house light, you could just have like a really sort of subtle ambient light. You'll notice at the beginning, like it still lights everything, the ambient light. So keep that in mind when you are looking at lighting, that ambient lights are going to be your flat lights. Point lights are little spherical lights. Your spotlights are these little tiny cones of lights that you can animate and change their position to, and that your parallel lights are basically like rays of the sun. That's it for lighting. The next video I will go over cameras.